Welcome back. You're listening to the second half of Choosing Life, and I'm so excited about, I told you we had a special guest. I'm so excited about who you're going to be listening to today because before I introduce you, I still remember when I first read your book. I was living in Ohio. I remember the sun. It was kind of cold because it was winter. And what I remember is the fact that I was crying because I'd been doing tons of work. I'm a therapist, and I'd been doing tons of my own work on family of origin, working on relationship stuff. And suddenly your book came out, and it was like, this is not all about family of origin dysfunctional stuff. Half of this, later as I went on to read about the brain and research the brain, half of this is how I am, half of this is gender, and it was so releasing. It is the first book. Anybody that comes to me for family therapy, or rather couples therapy, they have to read your book. And the book is, are you ready? Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. John Gray, PhD. Dr. Gray is the author of that book and many more, and many of you are familiar with him. You've probably seen him on Oprah, Larry King, The Today Show, and Good Morning America. So, John Gray, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be with you.
Oh, it's an honor to be with you. Well, I would love to know, how did you come to writing that book? I mean, that really changed how I saw myself in relationships, how I saw my partner, how I related, how I thought about things. I pretty much feel like I can end an argument now, along with that information, a couple of other things, within 20 minutes if I want to have a real discussion about something. How did you come to find out that information and bring that to us in a form that you can read to your husband if he won't read it, and he gets it immediately, which was very important?
Well, I had an extra advantage because I'm a guy. I know guys want to hear things. You know, there was a real challenging thing that happened. It was 20 years ago as a marriage counselor. I was counseling men and women, and around that time there was all this new research talking about men and women's differences. But nobody was really telling anybody about it because the agenda at the universities was to use the research to prove that we're the same. Nobody was taking that information and saying, look how different we are. Look how different. And it's funny, even today research comes out and they say, well, what does this mean? And the researcher says, we don't know. And I say, you don't know? This explains why, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But it was like a huge political incorrectness to talk about the differences. So when couples came in counseling, I could literally just teach them about the differences and translate sometimes what they were saying, what they were not saying, misinterpretations. And we would get so much progress. So then I started teaching seminars on it. Now, seminars was more tough because when you're speaking to a broad audience, you now are not, in there with each person's individual problem and showing how it relates. It was so easy to offend people when you're talking about differences between men and women. So I had to struggle to find a way to do it in a light, playful, humorous way and work really hard to choose my words so that they wouldn't offend men and they wouldn't offend women, so that you could actually say the ideas without alienating either sex.
Well, you know what? It did that very well because I was raised a feminist, and I think part of the reason I was crying with relief is it was like, wait a minute. Forget this stuff. Some of us are very different. And then, of course, with all the brain research that's been out in the last 10 years, it's totally changed. But it shifts things very, very quickly. If I will try to figure out what you're saying instead of interpret it through my brain or my culture or my feminine mind or whatever. So I was so happy not only that you brought it to us, but that you put it in this great little story about Mars and Venus.
Yeah, it was a great story, and I remember, and the story we're talking about, for those who haven't read the book, it's sort of it begins the book with the Martians got in their spaceships and went to Venus, and they fell in love, and they came to Earth, but when they came, and everything was wonderful, but then something changed. They on Earth they experienced selective amnesia, and they forgot that they were supposed to be different. And as soon as they forgot those differences were normal and okay, that's when all the problems started. And I would see this in our relationships every time. Every time. It's like when a difference starts showing up again and again, we start thinking that, something's wrong with them and why they have to change. Instead of like, okay, that's different. How can we work together so I get what I need and you get what you need?
And in my case, it was, okay, something's wrong with you because of your family and you need to go work on this in recovery and blah, blah, blah. And it just would turn into kind of shaming. So it's funny because it was not politically correct. And as a feminist, it was just, you're not supposed to think that way. But I didn't care. It made perfect sense. But I wondered about the controversy. So many women refused to read your book for that reason. But now with all this research in the brain coming out, there is gender differences. I happen to be masculine in some areas and my husband may be feminine in some, but there are some places where there are very different ways of being.
Well, there's a lot of things that I have fun talking about now even more because there's so much research to back it up. One of the things that I stay away in my book in certain ways. In certain ways I touch it, which is the whole idea of emotions. And that, a man, your typical guy will conclude that a woman is more emotional than a man. Now, my experience is that men are emotional. They just process their emotions differently. However, brain research shows that the limbic system in the brain, which has to do with our emotions, it's kind of like the sunglasses we look at the world. If we're feeling good, we see everything is good. If we're not, everything's gloomy. Well, the limbic system is twice as big in women. And when a woman gets upset, 8 times more blood flows to the limbic system than a man. So this just, right there, you can just see in the brain, there's a lot more happening in her brain when she's upset. Now, the next thing that happens is and it's perfectly normal for her to have that 8 times more blood flow to her brain. But what's not normal and what's not healthy is in a normal brain, the serotonin will be released and it will wash over the limbic system and relax it. So this is your healthy woman who's feeling loved and supported and good that day. She might become upset about something, and then very quickly her brain will relax. So it becomes overactive and then relaxes. That's with serotonin. Now, men tend to have twice as much serotonin in their brains as women, and they synthesize it twice as fast as women. So that's why when men do have upsets, they go away very quickly. So a guy will often say, forget it. Don't worry about it. What's the big deal? Let's get to the point. Why does a woman want to talk more about things when there's problems and upsets? Because talking has been proven to stimulate the production of serotonin. Literally, we're talking neurobiology here.
So cool.
It's so amazing, And I spent 20 years, seeing these differences, and people always saying, where's the research? And where's the research? Well, now they have all this brain research to back it up.
And when it came out, that's what I thought of. I can't wait to say that to my clients. The other thing is you're describing people would say, well, so many men, she dies and a year later the guy's getting married. Well, that explains why a man can get through something, a tragedy, a trauma, a loss of a child, and be okay. It's not because they're so dysfunctional and sick and they don't have any feelings. It's because their brain works differently.
Their brain works differently. And when a man goes through a trauma, what happens to his brain is instead of serotonin levels going down, dopamine levels crash. Now, this is a different experience. Women tend to have much higher dopamine levels than men. And
what does that do?
Okay, here's dopamine is the neurotransmitter which produces energy, attention, focus. We're most familiar with the ADD/ADH syndrome. Well, that's a syndrome of low dopamine.
Right.
Okay. Now, a woman can have low dopamine and low serotonin, but her main issue is when her serotonin levels start rising, dopamine levels start rising as well. For men, they'll tend to have low dopamine levels, but high serotonin levels. They can also have low both, but generally the first reaction to stress a man has is lowering dopamine levels. So what does that look like in terms of real life? It means at work, what stimulates dopamine is action, achievement, accomplishment. And what really stimulates it is competition, challenge, and risk. So this is what the work world is. So take a man who has really low levels of dopamine. He will be attracted to like climbing mountains, jumping out of airplanes, driving his car really fast. These are men who normal life doesn't stimulate them at all. So they have no energy. They're bored with life unless they have all this stimulation. Okay, now what happens? Here's the age-old question. The man who in the beginning of a relationship has got all this energy, attentiveness, romance, and then suddenly it stops. Well, what happens is in the beginning this is a man who just started out with very low levels of dopamine, new and different woman, challenging. He has to compete to get her. It's all new and exciting. Dopamine levels get established. It's like climbing a mountain, but once he gets to the top of the mountain, no dopamine. So now he's in the relationship, dopamine levels start to drop. And so it's not like he suddenly just changed, he stopped loving her. It's just literally the brain chemistry changed. So here's another great example. I go to work, and remember you asked me before the interview, it's a lot of interviews today. I was feeling a little tired. I said, as soon as we start, I'll perk up. Why? Because challenge. Being in the moment, expertise being required, feeling needed, having to put out, suddenly dopamine levels get produced, and energy is there. So your typical guy goes to work, has stimulation, has plenty of energy, comes home to a comforting, nurturing, serotonin-producing environment. In that serotonin-producing environment, his serotonin levels, which are already high, go even higher, and his dopamine levels drop. And so he gets tired coming home, and he thinks it's because he worked hard. It's really because he's coming home to a serotonin-stimulating environment. which is why then in my books I always encourage women to let your man go to his cave, because they've proven that when a man goes to his cave, autonomy, being on your own, stimulates dopamine. So when a man comes home, he just needs to sort of enter into this space by first marking his territory, which is, this is my own place. I'm doing what I want to do. I'm in control of my life again. His dopamine levels rise up. Then he can then connect with the family.
This is great. Now you have to rewrite the book for those of us that want to hear all the chemical stuff.
I have. I've got 2 rewrites of the book. One is coming out in January. It's called Truly Mars Venus. Now that's the cartoon version. So it's the summary, the cliff notes. And
Little gift version.
It's a gift version. It's really, really sweet, the condensed version for anybody to go through very quickly. And then at the end of the month, I have a much longer version of Minute from Mars coming out, which has got all the research which backs up the ideas.
That is great.
It's so exciting.
It is. It's cool. So before all this research came out, did you get a lot of controversy from people saying?
Oh, yeah. They always said, where's the research? Where's the research? And I'd always say, look, I'm a marriage counselor. The ideas I put out work. They save marriages. I use them every day of my life in my own marriage, and they work. And they would say, well, how can you say all women are this way? I can't. I say the women that come to me for counseling are this way. And they are, you know.
And it's so true.
So
now, and also some people, like I said, well, I know I have one area, I'm very male. And so some clients would say, well, my husband's so sensitive and he's really emotional, but I don't talk like that. So what would you say to clients like that when they would say, well, I don't fit this category? Because I would have your book, I would have my clients that are gay, lesbian, heterosexual, very stereotypical masculine read it. And I would just say, well, just translate it.
Right.
Just change it.
Just see how it fits for you. And it does fit for everybody. And it's not like we're cookie cutters and we're all exactly the same. Let me give you an example. Like what somebody could say now is a stereotype of a woman. And in my book, I say this doesn't mean all women. It's just very general. Okay. And you can make generalizations because they exist. But one of the things is women cope with stress by talking. Okay. They come home, they want to talk. Now, this is not all women, but it's some women. Why? Almost all women have lower levels of serotonin when they get home from work, and they want to boost their serotonin. What are the symptoms of serotonin? Serotonin makes you feel optimistic. Serotonin makes you feel comforted. Serotonin makes you feel
bonded.
Well, that's actually oxytocin, which increases with serotonin, but bonded in relationship, and basically optimism and comfort. Another word I'm not forgetting right now, but that's enough. Now, when serotonin levels drop, that means she doesn't have the same optimism. Now, so she worries. So every woman I know worries too much. They come home and they obsess. There's this and there's this. We got to do this. This word overwhelm is in every woman's language. You don't see it that often in men. And so now what do some women do? Some women, not all, to overcome the overwhelm feelings is they talk. Why? Because talking is one way to stimulate serotonin. Some women, because the serotonin levels are low, they're not optimistic, so they don't believe that talking will do anything. Or if I talk, nobody will listen. If I talk, he won't understand it anyway. He'll just interrupt me with my solutions. Or if I talk, I'll just get minimized for having these sensitive feelings. So why bother? So that's one of the reasons women don't talk, is because their serotonin levels are low and they're convinced that it won't help anyway. But these very same women, if you ask them what they want when they get home, okay, they don't want talk, but what they want is one of the 3 things that produces serotonin. These are the 3 things. One is communication, or cooperation, or collaboration. And the very women that say, I don't want talk, I want action, those are women, they want collaboration. They want to come home and they want a husband who helps them with making the dinner, cleaning up for the kids, doing the homework with the kids, cleaning up the dishes. That's called collaboration, and that's what these women are wanting. So that's another version of it. It's the same principle. It's communication, cooperation, or collaboration. Those 3 things produce serotonin. So when I have the bigger picture, I see that all women, I mean literally almost all women, fit the category of low serotonin, and that is what I've described as Venusian.
And I think it is perfect. I don't care how politically incorrect. I think it's very accurate. Okay, so let's take the tragedy again. So at a tragedy...
Yes, thank you. We're bringing us back to that point.
He wants...
Well, what happens is his trauma, he has a stress, and his dopamine levels drop. Dopamine gives you meaning and purpose in life. Okay, so a man has a loss of a loved one, so his meaning and purpose is lost. So what he needs is some kind of stimulation to produce dopamine again. Being alone, being on his own starts raising the dopamine levels, which starts motivating him to now get in a relationship. He feels motivated by being alone. Think of it. When a woman is alone, her dopamine levels go up, but her serotonin levels go down, which means that that's her vulnerability, which is her sense of optimism. Her ability to trust significantly drops when she ends a relationship. So statistically, women take like 9 years before getting involved again after a divorce. Men, it's 3 years. Why? Because women have what we call a trust issue, and that's a serotonin issue, which is, I don't know if I can love again. It hurts too much. Also, a big issue about feeling hurt is the limbic system. When someone has been emotionally attached and you lose someone, the limbic system will become overactive. And what relaxes the limbic system is serotonin. Men easily produce serotonin, so they can easily heal that. And dopamine levels go down. And if he's left on his own, autonomy increases dopamine, which then results in increased testosterone, which motivates him to go out and get in a relationship again. It doesn't in any way indicate that he loved his lost partner any less than a woman might have loved her husband.
And that was the part that was so hard for me to explain. I really appreciate that. So my husband loves to play basketball, and we recently had a loss in our family, his mother. So, of course, he still wants to play basketball. And I was thinking, how could you go play basketball? Well, because it'll make him feel better.
Oh, absolutely. I tell the story in Minute from Mars when one of my good buddies, his daughter at 12 years old had cervical cancer.
Oh, right.
And it was just a horrible thing. And he hadn't even told me. My wife found out from his wife, and she says, well, you guys go out all the time. He hasn't even told you? I said, well, no, I'll give him a call. So I gave him a call, and there was like this silence. He didn't say anything. And then I said, I heard. And he says, yeah. And there was a long pause, and he says, you want to play tennis? I said, yeah. And that's what we did. And I remember going out of the house. My wife said, so you talked to him? I said, yeah. What did he say? Nothing. Well, what are you going to do? We're going to play tennis. And she had this kind of horrified look on her face. What? I said, well, that's how we bond. We'll go out and we'll play tennis, and that's what will make him feel better. That's how he'll cope with stress. And what then happened is after we played a few games,
Right.
Picking up the balls, we talked a little about it. And then after we finished the games, after we sort of bonded through the whole thing, then he shared some more about, what could he do and how he felt about it, whatever. So men do talk about it, but talking is kind of like the climax. How they get to that place is a whole different process, and they don't generally need as much talk.
And, I used to try to make my male clients be more feminine before I read your book and before I understood more about this. But, and you're nodding your head because I thought they'd feel better, but I kept noticing they didn't feel any better at all.
No, what I saw is, and I have to say, even from my own personal experience, is if I did too much emotional processing, it actually made me feel worse.
Right.
And a little bit it was fine, but with the women, it would always help them enormously. Now I have the physiological facts behind it. If you look at what happens to men in intimacy, in the bedroom, at that moment of climax, men as well as women will experience a peak level of oxytocin, which is bonding. When bonding occurs inside of a woman, she feels enormous fulfillment. Oxytocin is associated with endorphins for a woman. It's also associated with endorphins for a man. But what then quickly happens when oxytocin levels go up, a man's testosterone levels will drop. Now, see, when a woman's testosterone levels go up, her oxytocin levels will drop. They tend to be like on a seesaw. When a woman's in a competitive environment, that's testosterone.
Right, okay.
She doesn't feel the oxytocin, which is bonded with everybody. Now, a woman's level of stress is associated with oxytocin. And this is research that just came out at UCLA this year.
Wow.
They've now associated that for men, it's testosterone that helps them cope with stress. For women, it's oxytocin. Now they've called it, instead of the fight or flight reaction, which is testosterone, they call it the tend and befriend response, which is oxytocin. It's a bonding. So the greatest stress for women is when bonding breaks, oxytocin levels drop. Well, all a woman has to do is do a lot of testosterone activities, oxytocin levels drop, and she will experience an actual decrease of endorphins in her brain. And this is again, physiological stuff. What they found is that there's an enzyme, like for a man, when I climax, for example, in intimacy, any man, oxytocin levels will peak for a moment. Very quickly, they go way up, and he'll get some endorphins in his brain, and then his testosterone levels drop, which is why often men fall right asleep, why sports athletes are told not to have sex before a game, because their aggression level for several days is much lower, because testosterone levels drop. And when testosterone levels drop, they've even measured this, an enzyme is released in the brain which dissolves endorphins in the brain. So endorphins are the feel-good hormones. So, and it's like the brain rewards a man for having testosterone levels go up and punishes a man when testosterone levels go down, because it wants to reward you for doing something. So when men are depressed, when they have nothing to do, and you look at men when they're depressed, they have nothing to do. When women are depressed, they're generally depressed because they have too much to do. Have you ever noticed that? It's like that's the real source of women's depression, is that I got to do this, and nobody's helping me. Whereas for a man, if he's depressed, it's because nobody wants me. There's nothing for me to do. And that's because low testosterone causes depression in men. Low oxytocin causes depression in women.
Oh, well, being attention deficit, no wonder my husband loves me. Honey, get me a Coke. It's too much stress. So, you know what I was thinking is this must have been so exciting to have all this research and then rewrite Venus and Mars.
Oh, it is so exciting for me. It's just kind of like the rejuvenation of my life to have, I don't know, it's not like it has to be there, but so many years of people saying, where's the research and where's the research? And now to be able to explain every idea of that Men Are From Mars book, because it wasn't, all I did was observe human nature. And now you find the research which backs up human nature.
I was so excited when I saw the brain stuff. I was like, I can't believe it. I knew he was right. I didn't know how. Well, we're going to have to take a really quick break right now. So stay tuned and we will be right back.